share our agenda with you, but if in the chat you would put your name and your pronouns and where you're calling from, and if you have a favorite meme, share that. And maybe I'll start, Jessica. So my name is Sarah Bucci. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in Denver, Colorado, on Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne land. And I'm the Director of Strategic Communications with the Water Hub. And my favorite meme is the picture of the little dog in the fire that says, like, it's fine. That's how I feel most of the time. And I appreciate the dark humor of it. Jessica?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Jewell. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based outside of Los Angeles on Tongva land, and I'm the digital director at the Water Hub. And my favorite meme, I'm going to be uncreative and say that it's same, but I have a little surprise later of like a spin on it that I've seen recently later in the presentation.
Awesome. And it's great to see new names and familiar names in the chat. I love the reference to all capybara videos. We actually just had one in our like team meeting the other day that we were sharing around and feeling like we wanted to embody the energy of the capybaras bathing. So we're going to be together for the next hour. We're planning to talk for about 45 of those minutes and then open it up for Q&A. And if you have questions or thoughts to add, please use the chat as a way to communicate. And whichever of us is not presenting, we'll keep our eye on it in case there's anything we want to raise for the whole group. Jessica is going to kick us off with a little bit of context around what we're talking about today around modes of storytelling and what that means to tell our stories in different formats and get creative. I'm going to ground us in the basics around frames and messaging and how creative content across different types of platforms can hit onto different messages and frames that we want to be using. And then Jessica is going to take us on a whirlwind tour, mainly around the internet, of creative ways of telling your story. And then we'll do Q&A. So Jessica, I'll hand it over to you.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming again. Before we dive in, I want to ground us as well in what we're hoping to share with y'all today and the why. Communicators spend a lot of time developing messaging and learning how to frame our issues. And while op-eds and media placements can feel like a golden ticket, they aren't the only way to tell a story, right? You can get more legs from your reports, your blogs, press releases, etc., by getting creative with different formats beyond the written word to develop your message. People seek information in different forums, and research shows that people have to see something multiple times, right, before they consider taking action. So don't be shy in finding new ways to repurpose what you're trying to say. And I'm living proof, and I will put myself on blast in a sillier context. How many times have I been served ads on my Instagram stories before I caved and bought the thing? It took a while, but I was eventually swayable. Meeting people where they spend their time is key. There are so many different kinds of learners too, whether you're visual, creative, emotionally driven, that you need some humor to get through to you, you name it. And that's why it's so important to be inventive and not just have the goal to see your message bear fruit and multiply, but also to make your work accessible and attractive to different types of people. I'm going to hand you back to Sarah now to cover how to develop your message, but before we switch gears, feel free to drop in the chat about how you like to get creative with content.
Thanks, Jessica. And I like seeing all of the examples and just making me laugh, basically. People are, oh, I went ahead too far. Hold on. There we go. Seeing folks, how folks relate to different cultural moments. Love the mention of all the Pedro Pascal memes. That's certainly a fave on our team too. So before we dig into the basics of messaging, I want to talk a little bit about frames. And I don't know if anyone's a Daniel Tiger fan in the chat, but I found this GIF of Daniel Tiger. My nephew is like obsessed. I read a lot of the books to him. And I think that it does a really good job of describing what frames are. So a frame is the lens through which we understand the world. So like wearing glasses, the frames that we have on are going to impact how we take in and filter new information. And everybody uses a different frame or a different lens because it's shaped by their life experience. Basically, this is like the baggage that we all carry around with us. You know, when you like get into a fight with a friend and you're like, I'm so mad because of this thing, because I have like all these past experiences that make me think you're doing this thing, but really they're not. They're just like talking to you, and you've like brought something into your conversation that didn't even like didn't have to be there to begin with. That's basically what frames are. Everything that we see in culture, on the news, is impacted by the like baggage of our lives that we carry around with us. And this also includes cultural dominant narratives, which are basically like our society's collective myths. And there's lots of different of these depending on where you're from. In the US, I think a couple of examples of these like kind of collective myths that we tell are the myth of meritocracy, the whole bootstrap culture, things like American exceptionalism. These are like stories that our culture tells us over time, and it kind of gets baked into the psyche, and that's the kind of thing that we have to contend with if we're trying to change the narrative in the long term. That's really hard to do over generations of a story that our culture has been telling. And so it's really important to keep that in mind, because there's going to be ways that we approach issues and talk about issues that are going to tap into these different frames. And we're actually going to play a little bit of a game next. So one example of this is most people support protecting the environment, having clean and safe water, but there is a tension around this framing of environmental regulation being in opposition to economic prosperity. It's something that's like become baked into like the news and culture around protections. And so we know that that idea and that false choice isn't something that's supported by the facts. But depending on the audience that we're trying to talk to, we might get more traction by framing our issues around public health safeguards to activate those feelings and ideas around health and safety, rather than ones around like government control or the economy. And one way that we can really break out of that rigid kind of binary framing is by getting really creative through humor, art, and emotion. So we're going to play a little bit of a game here called Guess the Frame. So I have a couple of sentences here, and I want you to put yourself in the mindset of the person who is saying this. And I want you to, in the chat, take a guess around what baggage, what frame you think this person is bringing to an issue. So the first one here is saying, affordable housing nearby will decrease my property value. That's something that I hear in my neighborhood all the time, and I don't agree with it, but I think it's important to understand where people are coming from. Jess, maybe you can read out the chat here.
Yeah. So Helen says homeowner. That's a good one. But yeah, what sort of baggage would someone have if they said something like this? How would they see the world? Someone says NIMBY.
Mm-hmm.
Probably upzoning. Someone said, oh wow, I love it. The chat is lighting up, y'all. Fear of someone different than you. Someone says racist property owner. Someone says worried about their investments. Zero sum. Fear of wealth loss. Worried about economic precarity. There's a lot.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, I do think this taps into and again, this is like I think narrative in the US that we have to work against, because a lot of the work that we do is about thinking outside of ourselves, about thinking about our community as a whole, and thinking about our environment and ecosystems as part of that community. And so I liked when the example someone said about zero sum. And this makes me think about this idea of economic scarcity versus thinking about things in an abundance framing, and a community care, and like we're all in this together and we're all on equal footing together kind of framing. Okay, the next one is rivers are living beings.
Don't be shy, drop your ideas. What kind of frame would you see the world through? Someone says environmentalist, nature rights, holistic frame, an indigenous person. Someone says water is life, hippie. I see another one from Zakia that says indigenous frame. We have 3 folks so far with indigenous frames. Someone says environmentalist, but from a more spiritual space. Ecologist, another indigenous, rights of nature laws. These are all really good.
Yeah, this one for me made me think of spirituality and also just a different way of relating to water. And I think it's really important because a lot of what we are doing as a community is trying to bring people along with us to think about water, not just as something that we use and need, but as part of our broader ecosystem and this interconnectedness. And I think it's a nice way to get people out of the thinking of, again, this idea of like, what is water for us? It's something that we can, it's here for us to use. And this like, it's an important resource for us. But if you only think about that, then you're going to get yourself in a situation where you're basically like, but divvying up all the water without a care for the environment. Okay, the next one is, they'd be able to pay their bills if they didn't waste money on fancy sneakers or a new phone. This is something that comes up when we work on issues around things like water bill assistance and pricing and affordability. And so I've seen this come up a bunch. I'll just be a little vulnerable moment. I'm like really hoping the Biden student loan thing gets through the Supreme Court, because I want my student debt relief. But you see this come up in the news, the framing around debt relief as like a handout, or this idea, this kind of like bootstrap culture.
Some folks are, I love that the first one is just straight up, wow, racist. Yes. We have wealthy, boomer, classist, assumption. Someone says someone who consumed right-wing media. Bootstrapper, yeah. We have a social or fiscal conservative, anti-government, anti-entitlement, us versus them, another classism, someone who's out of touch with the current economy, higher income. There's a lot. I love all the engagement.
Yeah, I think that the idea, again, this bootstrap thing, and then this classism that comes in, the idea that like people can't have like things that bring joy to their life if they are needing assistance, or the fact that we don't all, like as a society, like collectively make sure that people aren't in that kind of situation. And that idea of like personal responsibility versus where I think a lot of the ways that the solutions that we're trying to approach issues, in particular from a water frame, we're thinking about like water affordability and shutoffs and things like that, is like from one of abundance. It's a choice that we can make as a society, but also one of like institutional responsibility, and the fact that there are systemic institutional problems that require systemic institutional solutions. Okay, my last one is water is PPE. And PPE means personal protective equipment. It's something we were saying a lot during the pandemic, thinking about hand washing as kind of the first line of defense against spread of disease and public health. I guess I kind of gave my answer away when I just said that, but I'm curious what other people, when people hear water is personal protective equipment, what do people think?
Darian says community health. Juan says healthcare mindset. Rebecca says we have 2 public healths back to back. 2 essentials back to back. Thinking that water is easy to access. Someone says technocrat. We just have a solid yes.
Cool.
Great.
Well, I hope people found this exercise helpful. This is something that we've been trying out just as a way to think about, again, like what are all the frames that people could be viewing issues for, and how we talk about them, and how does that tap into the ones that are really helpful for us, try to shift the narrative on the ones that we think are unhelpful, or avoid framing that's unhelpful. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just ground us in a little bit of info about how much the public is just really with us on issues generally, but a little bit about how that framing can impact it. These are some stats from our last national voter poll that the Water Hub did last summer. And we'll be doing another poll this summer, and really diving into message testing and looking at the frames that get activated for people on different water issues. But one thing that I think is really cool is that there's almost universal support for the idea that water is a human right. Access to safe and affordable water is a basic human right that everyone should have. It was like 89% support. Very strong support in this poll. And I think it's an important thing to just ground us in as we're looking at like how we're going to tell this message to different audiences, is like, honestly, this is like a universal value that people really do believe. This one, the next couple we've been pulling things on the human right to water and looking at things like water bill assistance and long-term affordability and the privatization of water systems. This is a little bit focused on drinking water systems, but I thought it was interesting to share. So we found 75% of voters agreed or supported the idea of a permanent federal low-income assistance program. Most voters prefer water systems that are owned by the public. It was something by like a 4-to-1 majority. And actually, when we asked what kind of water system do you think is going to provide more reliable, more safer, and more affordable water, voters also overwhelmingly said that they thought a water system owned by the public and not by a private company was more likely to deliver those services. But on the framing, even though we see really strong support for, I'm getting jumpy with my Zoom here. Let me go back. There we go. Even though we see really strong support for a permanent low-income water bill assistance program, when you ask voters what kind of messaging resonates with them, we found there is actually more support for talking about that issue as one of water affordability and making sure everyone was able to have access to water, and that we weren't burdening communities with overpriced water over framing around bill assistance or debt relief, things like that, which is I think is just something interesting to kind of keep in mind. Okay, and this is my last slide before I kick it back to Jessica, who is going to be doing the really fun part of the presentation. So before we look at different ways you can tell your message across content, let's talk a little bit about what the ingredients of a powerful message are. So the first one is starting with our shared values. These are our guiding beliefs. For any message that we're delivering, we want to make sure we're defining what's the shared value that we are trying to tap into to get heads nodding and hearts pumping with us. So some of those examples include things like community care, security, safety, abundance or scarcity. And we really want to identify what the value is that we're trying to tap into, because we want people to have an emotional connection to our work and to our issues and to feel part of that community. The problem that you described should then describe the threat to that shared value. You want to get really specific. How are people impacted? What's lost if a problem is not solved? And then our solution is our vision for the better world. It helps us move past the doom and gloom and believing that a better world is possible. And this is really important because despair is antithesis, that is a hard word to say, antithesis to action. And to motivate people, we really need to be activating other kinds of emotions like anger and hope, for example. And we can do that really well in creative forms of reaching people. And then lastly, you want to have an action. So you and anything you do are kind of leaving people with the question, okay, what do I do? So you have to tell them and be really specific. Is it something specific, a policy that they can support, getting in touch with their elected officials or decision makers? Or is it as simple as going to your website to read more or engaging in a campaign in another way? All right. Next up, Jessica's gonna start guiding us through different types of content. And I think I just want to say, like, these are all the like really important things, the ingredients of a powerful message and framing to understand in the back of your head. But like, you're not going to encapsulate all of those things in like a meme or a video clip or whatever. And so I think it's kind of just want to think about like hitting on little bits of all of this and all of your different content across different platforms, because you are going to touch different people in different ways. And so don't feel like you have to then like have all of this crammed into like one illustration or one video. It's just something to keep in mind across like the slate of all of your content on an issue or campaign. Jessica.
Me again. So yeah, thank you for that great segue, Sarah. And now I'm going to walk us through on how to package our message in different ways and how to have a little bit of fun, right? So first, I'm going to challenge us to lean into humor and pop culture and to not snub a good memeable moment. Using memes is a different way to deliver messages in a package that people already recognize flying around their feeds, and how we can be opportunistic to tap into these social moments to kind of get into the flow of conversation. The work that we do in different movement spaces is hard, and so it's important to try to, when appropriate, incorporate some levity and humor to shake things up. For example, I created this meme after Rihanna's Super Bowl performance for our Twitter account. It's ended up being one of our most popular posts of the year to date, and just wanted to use it as an example of how we don't have to always make our issues heavy and wonky every time we're putting out new content. And who recognizes, like we said when everyone was coming in, the dog comic here with the house on fire. This is a great take from this commonly used meme. It was one piece from a content library Into Action Lab created for a campaign we're working on with Climate Nexus and Resource Media with support from the Energy Foundation to increase awareness for the benefits coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. And I see that Carrie is here with us, one of the folks I'm collaborating on this project with. So hi, Carrie. And so here are some insights we've learned so far from this first batch of content that Into Action Lab created, which was a suite of GIFs and memes. So they leaned into Reddit and it's proving to be a great space for educational awareness building, given the nature of the platform, which is idea sharing. That is the nature of Reddit. Love it, hate it, that's kind of its jam, right? So they tested how this content performed in different subreddits, such as the apolitical subreddit, show fandoms, anime subreddits, and even the Dark Brandon subreddit, and saw conversations, link sharing, and discussion boosting from seeding out these memes. And one of the most interesting behaviors that happened on these threads was folks trying to understand the how and why paid advertising was supporting them. People are so used to being marketed to, and it's rarely for their benefit. So they appreciated the use of memes in this way to learn about energy efficient upgrades or other benefits that are coming to communities in their lives as a result of the IRA. our takeaway so far is memes are prompting education and engagement. We can see how the right has proliferated disinformation using content like memes and how effective that tactic has been. And that's why movements like ours can use memes to work as the counter offense. If they can be designed to disinform, we can switch that up and use memes to educate folks. And ready for gifts. Gifts, another interesting and fun way to reach people. And Into Action Lab has also found that they're even more accessible than infographics or stat graphics. They just engage a different part of our brain and a different audience. And you'll notice with the examples you'll see here that they're kind of audacious in the vision we want to create together and the movement and like the future we want to imagine. So for example, the gifts on the far right, we're seeing like a thriving community. We're not necessarily seeing the bones of infrastructure and a reservoir and whatnot about, you know, what a community with good water systems could look like. So like I mentioned, Into Action Lab created these for us as well. I see that Sarah dropped in the content library for that they created. A lot of this content, we encourage people to share. It's open source, so anyone who wants to use these, it's free, and we encourage y'all to seed out these messages. Yeah, so next up, we are going to move into audio and thinking beyond the tweet. I'm encouraging us all to try emerging social media formats as an algorithm hack, because sometimes they can feel more personal than you know, a tweet or text or even, you know, creative content that you're seeing shared. It's a more personal way to tell stories, audio at times, like you've seen the advent of Clubhouse and now Twitter Spaces. So for example, last year, the Water Hub co-hosted a Twitter space with the US Water Alliance for Imagine a Day Without Water. We invited partners, including PolicyLink and others, including Dig Deep and Frontline Voices from West Street Recovery and Rural Community Assistance Partnership. We talked about the opportunity to invest in safe and affordable water systems in the context of new federal funding from the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Twitter Spaces are like a modern day fireside chat, if you've never heard of them. It's an audio only live event where people can drop in and drop out, and they're notified when you go live. And we wanted to share an example. Let's give this audio clip a listen to hear from one of our speakers, Heather Tanana, with Universal Access to Clean Water for Tribes, talk about the human right to water.
We absolutely should obtain and recognize a human right to drinking water in the United States. And while climate change is impacting water supply, water quality, the domestic use is so small in comparison to other uses. There is no reason why we can't fulfill that human right to water.
Great. So that was a potent soundbite, right? So while the event was, we had, you know, over 300 listeners come throughout the, you know, the event, we were able to use that content, you know, and events like these are excellent opportunities to repurpose even after. So let's go forward and talk about an example of how you can repurpose audio content. This is a waveform graphic. If you've never heard of them, you'll see what they look like, but it's a way to use audio and a soundbite and make it into a visual asset. It's a good application to how to get more legs out of something like a Twitter chat or a Zoom webinar or a panel. Here's an example of one the Water Hub created for a panel we hosted about arts and culture's role in organizing. Let's give this one a watch. This was a clip from Marcus Trujillo. He was one of our speakers, and he was a designer who used to work for Pueblo Action Alliance. He's currently working for his tribal government, but we were happy to have him, and let's give it a listen.
Water is always at the center of everything that we do. As a Pueblo graphic designer, I want to always center water as a reflection of that, and how we are taught to honor water, and how, you know, the relationships that we have, and the specific ceremonies that we carry can be carried forth in a good way. Really, a lot of, you know, as men and leadership specifically here, even within our tribal nations, it's vital that women leadership, that men step back, you know, in this specific topic of environmental justice when dealing with water.
So this was a great example of, you know, we had such a rich conversation, and we wanted to get more content out of it later. And so we created a set of these graphics to kind of recap and reseed out more assets for folks to connect with the message and the story that we were trying to tell after the event. Next, we can talk through art.
Water is always.
Oops. All right. So next, speaking about art and organizing, here we are again. So I wanted to share a few examples of how art can be an excellent way and vehicle to tell stories, and carrying our messages and being the conduit for that in a different way. Our partners at the Water Equity and Climate Resilience Caucus commissioned artists in 2021 to create works inspired by the human right to water. To the left here, you'll see a painting by Lavender Williams. The song at the bottom, you'll see pictured here, was produced by a member of the Narrative Working Group. His name is Seth Bernard. It's a song that includes really powerful call and response from Monica Lewis Patrick of We the People of Detroit, sampled throughout the song, that really takes it up a notch and, you know, really is strong in delivering the message of the human right to water. We'll drop the link to the song in the chat. Highly recommend you listen. The album art you'll see above that to the top right isn't from that wave of commissions, but was produced by Benny Starr. He is U.S. Water Alliance's first artist in residence, and the album is entirely about water justice. The link that Sarah just dropped is his Spotify album, and I just wanted to drop Seth's Water Song. They're both really powerful, you know, pieces of music. And I just want to emphasize that music and art just hit different, right? They have the power to inspire and disarm and invite us to be bold in our vision for a world that might not exist yet. So yes, I think that art and culture are really key when we're designing our campaigns and when we think about ways to get our messages out in different ways. Next is exploring illustrations. So these illustrations are from a report from the Community Task Force for Water Equity on recommendations for national water assistance programs. And it does say something, right? We're seeing all the different intersections of their vision and the world they want us all to imagine. Even if you didn't make it through the 22-page document, but you saw these illustrations they created in a centerfold, you would get the gist of what the report was trying to say. And you might actually be touched differently than had you just read plain text, right? So I want to pause for a minute and hear from all y'all. What stands out most to you here in this illustration? For me, I'll start. I love on the far right, where it says safe and healthy with the tap. And you see two people who are working together, right, to turn it on. So kind of illustrating that this is a community effort, that we work together to, you know, bring safe and healthy water to communities. Yes, Ken, it seems a bit busy. It's a lot to take in, it's true. The interesting thing too, just to speak to that, is in the report, they actually took smaller pieces of this larger illustration and sprinkled them throughout. So this was kind of the culmination of all the different vignettes they had throughout it. Cheryl, I see you're talking about protecting the most vulnerable. Oh, we see three folks saying in a row to protect the most vulnerable stood out. Angelisa, you say you don't even have to read the words. The sunlight with the beams in the back tells her that this is a positive report. Yes. Going beyond the doom and gloom, getting creative, using visuals is a really, potent way to get our stories out. And Rebecca says, I like how you can get a high level sense at first glance and read deeper if you wish. That's right. So Suzanne, I'll say lastly that you say you like lots of components. It's not a simple process. It involves participation and cooperation of everyone. Wonderful. Thank you everyone for sharing what you're seeing. Next, I'm going to chat about how graphics are also a great storytelling device. So, how I was saying at the top that memes and GIFs engage a different part of our brain and perhaps a different audience, and perhaps people that engage more with play or humor, or something familiar that they're already seeing in this, social zeitgeist out there. There's other folks who really, can like, a stat graphic is sticky for them. Like, they like it. It's a great storytelling device for, different types of folks that consume that content regularly and quickly engage. You can pull out the punchiest facts from a report or a news story, for example, and make it bite-sized. It's a less overwhelming, dense way for people to connect to an issue. So you can consider a graphic to be like an appetizer. It's an accessible way for people to get interested in your stories and want to learn more. Another format that, folks use to tell stories in a different way is video. And we wanted to share an example from last year. Our partners, again, at the Water Equity and Climate Resilience Caucus, gathered community and organizational testimonials for a congressional briefing to call for water affordability at the federal level. Passing the mic and letting people share their personal experience is a potent way to sway opinion as the hypothetical becomes real. It's one thing to read a news story or a policy recommendation. It's another thing to humanize our issue with people who are living this reality in front of us. And while that permanent policy change hasn't manifested yet, for universal water affordability, our work continues. Let's go ahead and give this a watch. And Sarah, I just want to flag if you could bump up the volume just a smidge this time.
Mi recibo de agua me sale en esa cantidad, 200 y algo cada 2 meses.
Our water bills here are over $100 a month for our residents.
Regularmente de 100 a 140 mensual.
Yo podría decir que en mi hogar destinamos aproximadamente un 15% de nuestros ingresos para pagar la factura del agua.
Y pues ese aumento está pasando a perjudicar a todos nuestros bolsillos porque somos, como ya lo dijimos, de bajos recursos.
Thank you, Sarah. So yes, this is a potent way to tell stories, outside of something that might be plain text or an op-ed. Seeing people and humanizing this, and also just want to make clear that passing the mic to people who are having this lived experience is really key and powerful. And then I just wanted to cover one more, way to tell stories, and that's through photos, right? This is the common one that we use, but I just want to put it in the context of what we've been talking about. You'll see here an elder at a rally for water affordability in California that was led by our partners at Community Water Center. Our colleague Jose attended the event, camera in hand, to take pictures for them and shoot some video. It's another example of how the human right to water can be communicated through a different lens, quite literally. This work, again, is heavy. And as a movement, we're trying to work in relationship with the communities we're trying to serve. To learn some tips on how to create ethical visual content, I encourage you all to check out our ethical imagery guide that we'll drop in the chat and in our follow-up materials. We're going to be moving into questions now, but I do want to also prompt y'all to share if there are orgs you think are doing a great job with their visual storytelling. Drop your shout outs. I can start. I think that Dig Deep does an excellent job with how they tell their stories and the communities that they serve. If you visit their website or their socials, you'll see a lot of, human-centric content, and it's just really beautiful the way that they capture it. Awesome, that's it for me. If folks have questions, we're all for it. You can either drop your question in the chat, or if you want to drop it in the Q&A section, please feel free, don't be shy.
And yeah, thanks. I see if you have to run, all good. We'll also share out this recording and all the resources that we've talked about and examples in a follow-up. But thoughts, ideas, questions? Ooh. You got it, Jess?
Yeah, Lisa. So their Into Action Lab for sure is an incredible resource. They create open source GIFs and memes for not just our issue, but many issues. They have a Slack that you can get on. I will flag that you're interested in this and see if I can get you some follow-up information if you want to join the Slack space. You can also request stuff, based on an occasion coming up, whether it's about reproductive justice or water or climate. They do all types of stuff, but we'll reshare the content library that we were referencing in our talk, in our follow-up materials, and then I will follow up with you to see if I can get you on the Slack.
I think we have one in the Q&A, and I see a lot of really good questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can, and also follow up with folks directly. But there's one from Allison around brands trying too hard. I love this quote. She says, "I love a good meme, but often nonprofit or otherwise, brands seem to be trying too hard and falling flat." Like, quote, "Hello, fellow kids. How do you find a way to both authentically and genuinely, engage with humor?" And one thing I'll say is I think it's kind of there's something like my personal philosophy on this is like different organizations have different personalities, and so I think it's really good to like try new things and to like kind of not be so scared of thinking outside the box a little bit, but at the same time, like it takes all kinds. So if you feel like your voice or your organization's voice, that ain't it, like that's fine. But I think that there is like a real opportunity where okay, so my favorite social media accounts right now are all like wildlife agencies and utilities that are like freaking hilarious. I don't know if folks follow like the Northeast Ohio Sewer District. It's like the best account on Twitter. And there's actually a really good profile of the person behind that account. But there's a couple other ones. So maybe we'll try and dig up favorite ones to share for inspiration. But I think it's also okay to kind of like lean into that if you're like, if you're kind of coming at it from like that like dad humor vibe of like, I'm a person on the internet trying to be funny. Like that also can be authentic and engaging and interesting. And I think it just really depends on like who you are, who your organization is, and who your audience is. And you have to try stuff out. So like, I totally understand. Like I see what you're saying. It's like when we like when you see it and you're like, oof, that one like just didn't quite land, didn't feel real, but like you gotta try. There is a let's see, a lot of great questions. I'm just rolling up here. There was a question around making maps engaging and feeling like hearing that maps don't move people and having any suggestions for that. Now I'm a visual thinker. I think there's lots of different ways of understanding information. And so I think one of the points we were trying to get across in this conversation is that it is a good idea to like try to move people using different types, using words, using imagery, illustration, infographics, and maps I think can be really helpful if they have a very specific like goal in mind in terms of like what you're trying to convey. So if you're trying to show the so I think that would be my like main tip and suggestion for maps. If you're thinking about like, okay, I want to ground an issue in place and we want to show, I'm trying to think of like, I'm sure I can think of like an actual example to share. And we can follow up with that. But like, if you want to show like, okay, this, if we're looking at like a water quality issue across a watershed using something that's like a map that shows hotspots. So it's kind of like a visual representation of all of the places where a contamination is being found or something like that. I think that kind of thing can be really helpful. But I do see maps that are like too busy. They're trying to do too many things and it can be really hard to understand like what you're trying to get across. So that's my tip there. Jessica, any other thoughts on maps?
No, I just was trying to prep myself to answer a couple other questions though.
Go, take it away.
Sure, absolutely. So I just want to acknowledge that Zakia is asking for resources to help people make their own GIFs and that Canva is a little imperfect. But I just wanted to call out that that's a good question. I will include that in our wrap-up blog and ask the people who do it best and see if they have any suggestions for accessible, easy to use GIF creation tools. So thank you for asking that. We also got a question about digital accessibility. So we see Jackson said that some of these samples seem like they would be difficult to make ADA compliant. And accessibility for people with disabilities is not just diversity and sensitivity audiences and how we keep this compliant when imagery and text colors and values and tones and sizing would be challenging. That's also a good question. I just wanted to say that that's actually a good kind of segue that we will be later this year holding a digital accessibility training, and we are still building out the curriculum for that. So aside, the short answer is I don't have all of the answers at the moment, but of course, at the very bare minimum, making sure that your alt text is descriptive, finding ways to incorporate even humor in the alt text and not just making it dry and descriptive so that folks can enjoy the spirit of this content. But yes, more on, contrast, sizing, etc. in a future training. Let's see what else. Suzanne, you were asking that promoting these sorts of social media campaigns is awesome for engagement and education, but you're wondering if there's evidence that this type of engagement leads to behavior change. Now, I think this speaks to like the ecosystem, right, of long-term narrative change. One single tactic might not move the needle completely, but it can stoke conversation. Like, for example, we're seeing like we were mentioning on Reddit, and using some of these memes and GIFs in spaces like anime fandoms, or, you know, the dark Brandon subreddit that can be kind of harsh, you know. When you start to seed out these messages, you start to see people shift where they become inquisitive, they want to learn more, and these are people who we may discount or discard or feel are immovable. So this is long-term work. Sarah talks about this often, that narrative change takes a lot of time. And so it depends on what the campaign is and what your KPIs are. But I do see, when appropriate, maybe not every time, but memes and GIFs and more creative pieces of content can be part of a larger strategy to create that change. Christina, you're asking how to grow an organization's TikTok following. That's a bigger conversation. We have aspirational goals of other trainings to hold, so that's helpful for us to know that that would be of value. I just want to acknowledge that you dropped that in. Laura,
One thing on it. Oh, are you going to talk about Laura's question? Because I was going to just share a resource on the chat too.
Please do. Please go for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we don't have. I think we do have information about color choice in the guide, but if not, I think we can make sure that that's included. But there are a lot of really good resources. Adobe in particular has an accessibility check that you can do on your anything that you make, like in the Adobe platform. And they also have a tool on color accessibility that I recommend as well. So I just put that in the chat too.
I wanted to, I'm sorry, Sarah.
No, you're good. There's just like a lot of conversation going on, which is awesome. And hopefully we'll get to everything.
Totally. I just wanted to share that one of our friends, Andrea Leon Grossman, who we worked with while she was at ASUN on a desalination project, that, to be clear, resisting a desal plant that y'all may or may not have heard of in California. She was saying that I'm looking at the graphics that we helped make for them with their campaign and the videos, and she wanted to just cite that for them, using these graphics or using graphics and video was helpful to help move, folks to action, to kind of speak to the previous question of evidence of if these have impact or not. In the case of that fight against Poseidon, it helped our partners to have those pieces for sure.
One thing that's coming up is if we have any recommendations about growing an organization's presence on TikTok, or orgs that we think are doing a good job. And I want to take a step back and just think about like how you grow your presence on any platform. We strongly believe that you need to have a specific strategy for every single platform that you're on, because they're reaching different audiences. The people that are like, and Jessica knows way more about this than me, so I'm going to stop talking in just a second, but it's like, if you just post the same thing on every platform, and you don't think about the formatting that's right for that platform, or tweaking it to make it appropriate for that platform, that can be really hard. But like the act of growing one's following is like in some ways kind of slow and arduous and nonsensical. And so it's like sometimes things just like feel like they go viral. And for us, like viral is not like, we have our own Water Hub accounts. It's not like the crazy like tens of millions of views or anything, but it sometimes is like kind of hard to make sense of rhyme or reason. And so we do use analytical tools to look at our posts, what types of things do get the most engagement. We found people really are interested in like hopeful and solutions oriented content that we're sharing, even though we're often posting kind of news of the day on educational materials. which can get kind of in that doom and gloom thing that we talked about. And so I think that there's like, I'll just hand it over to Jessica before I just keep rambling.
No, you already said it though. It was a good question, like I said before, about how to grow a TikTok, presence. It's good to know that that's something people want to learn about, but is a whole other conversation. And everything Sarah said, and also learning how to make this sustainable work as you think about doing more video first content, takes a lot of time and planning. But yeah, I'm happy to take this back to the team as something folks are interested in learning more about. Can you, I want to name actually that we're at 10:59. I don't know if folks have a hard stop, but there's lots of good conversation happening. Ken, you were asking, what about platform effects? Do some platforms like Twitter present risks for positive messaging or engagement? I'm going to say that the trolls, they live everywhere. They live in all the social medias. So there's going to be a risk. Sure, I say it depends on what spaces you're part of, knowing that there are going to be times that they're just going to come out. It's sometimes hard to dodge. But we have found, at least within like water Twitter, which is kind of our niche, the reception has been really positive, especially dipping into that kind of self-deprecating humor, knowing like in the space and context of like, there's a lot of wonks in this space. So like, let's make fun of ourselves a little bit. People appreciate that. So there was resonance there. I would assume that if you started to get on the more snarky side, perhaps, making fun of a target, if you have a campaign that you're going after, I've worked on campaigns like that, and you will get some heat for it, but maybe that is the intention sometimes. It depends. Having a tough skin is important, but it's something that can sometimes be out of your control, and luckily people have short attention spans, and it's still worth testing if it's appropriate.
Well, we're at time. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. It was a really fun conversation, and I hope you get ideas from each other. We think about this stuff all day, every day, as I know many of you do, but by no means do we have the corner on expertise. I think there's a lot of knowledge in the proverbial room. So really appreciate you sharing as well. And put our email, waterhub@climatenexus.org. All of our individual emails are on our website. So we're very responsive if you have questions or ideas or things you're working on. And just appreciate you spending a little bit of your Thursday with us.
Thank you, everybody.